5 armed men rode toward a ranch that had no weapons, no neighbors, and no chance. The dust from their horses rose like smoke signals announcing death. But when their leader spotted something hanging on the fence, every rifle lowered, every horse stopped. Not from mercy, from generations of belief carved deeper than any law. A white buffalo hide stretched across weathered wood, its presence impossible to ignore. In the vast emptiness of the frontier, where men took what they wanted and justice came too late, this single piece of sacred skin held power that no fortification ever could. What happened next would prove that some protections run deeper than steel. Silas Drummond's hands shook as he lowered the water bucket. Through the gap in the barn wall he counted them. 5 riders, moving slow, deliberate. The kind of slow that meant they'd already decided this place was theirs. His daughter Nessa stood frozen near the well, her eyes locked on the approaching figures. She didn't run. Running meant accepting what was about to happen. Silas felt his chest tighten. 3 years since his wife passed. 3 years of holding this land together with nothing but worn rope and stubbornness. The ranch sat miles from anywhere that mattered. No one would hear. No one would come. The lead rider wore a black hat with a red band. Silas recognized the description from Town Talk. Cade Mercer. The name carried weight in every settlement within 100 miles. 12 ranches stripped bare in 4 months. Families left with nothing but the clothes they wore. Some didn't even get that mercy. Silas had heard the stories. He'd listened to men in the supply store describe how Mercer's crew moved like locusts, taking livestock, tools, food stores, anything worth carrying. The man never left witnesses willing to testify. Fear did that work for him. Nessa's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. Papa. Not a question. A statement of fact. She knew what those riders meant. She'd been telling him for weeks they needed to leave, find a town, live somewhere with people. But this land held his wife's grave. The fence posts bore her touch. Every corner whispered her memory. Leaving felt like betraying her all over again. Now that choice seemed foolish, deadly foolish. The riders spread out as they approached, forming a loose half-circle. Professional, practiced. Silas counted their weapons. 3 rifles clearly visible. 2 men had their hands near their sides where holsters would be. His own hands held nothing but calluses and age spots. No rifle leaned against the barn door. No pistol waited in his belt. He'd sold the weapons 2 winters back when food mattered more than protection. That decision haunted him now with crushing clarity. Cade Mercer pulled his horse to a stop 30 yards out, close enough to establish dominance, far enough to assess threats. His eyes swept the property with the efficiency of a man who'd done this before. The small barn, the modest house, the empty corral, the water pump, taking inventory, calculating value. His face showed no emotion. This was business. Cold, simple, inevitable. Silas stepped forward, positioning himself between the riders and his daughter. A useless gesture. They both knew it. But a father did what a father did, even when it meant nothing. His throat felt like sandpaper. Words formed and died before reaching his lips. What could he say? Please. Mercy. Men like Mercer didn't trade in either currency. Then something shifted. Mercer's eyes caught on something to the right. His entire posture changed. The calculated confidence drained from his face, replaced by something Silas had never seen in descriptions of the man. His hand, which had been resting casually on his saddle horn, now gripped it white-knuckled. The other riders noticed their leader's reaction. One by one, their gazes followed his line of sight. The change rippled through them like a physical force. Horses shifted nervously. Hands moved away from weapons. One man's face went pale despite the sun-darkened skin. Silas followed their stares. The fence. The white buffalo hide his wife had helped him stretch and cure years ago. Hanging exactly where it had been since the day old Tocho pressed it into his hands with words about protection and spirits and debts that transcended understanding. At the time, Silas had accepted it with gratitude, but little belief. A beautiful gift from a man he'd helped. Nothing more. Now, watching 5 armed men stare at that hide like it was made of lightning, he wondered if he'd understood nothing at all. Mercer's horse took a step backward without being commanded. The animal felt what its rider felt. In the heavy silence, Silas heard Nessa's sharp intake of breath. She saw it too. The fear, the recognition. Whatever that white hide meant to these men, it wasn't just decoration. It was a warning written in a language older than any law. But would it be enough to save them? Cade Mercer's jaw tightened as he stared at the white hide. His second-in-command, a lean man called Voss, leaned forward in his saddle. "Boss, that's just—" Mercer's hand shot up, silencing him mid-sentence. The gesture carried more weight than any shout. Silas watched the exchange, his heart hammering against his ribs. These men knew something that made them hesitate when hesitation meant weakness. The white buffalo hide moved slightly in the breeze, its pure surface catching the midday light. Silas had cleaned it just last week, the way his wife had taught him. She'd understood its importance better than he had. "Some things protect by their presence alone," she'd said once, running her fingers along the hide's edge. He'd thought she meant the beauty of it, the respect it commanded as craftsmanship. Now he wondered if she'd known something deeper. Mercer dismounted slowly. The movement made Silas's muscles coil with tension, but the man didn't advance toward the house. Instead, he walked toward the fence where the hide hung. His boots crunched in the dry dirt, each step measured, careful, like a man approaching something that could bite. He stopped 10 feet from the fence, close enough to see the details, far enough to maintain distance. His eyes traced the beadwork along the hide's border, the traditional patterns his wife had added with Tocho's guidance. "Where did you get this?" Mercer's voice came out rough, stripped of the casual menace from before. A genuine question, maybe the first honest thing the man had said in years. Silas felt Nessa shift behind him. He kept his own voice steady, though his throat threatened to close. "A man gave it to me, years back. Payment for help I didn't think deserved this much." Mercer's eyes never left the hide. "What man?" The question carried an edge now. Not threat. Something closer to urgency. Fear, even. Silas saw it in the way the outlaw's shoulders had drawn tight, the way his breathing had gone shallow. "Tocho, elder from the northern territories. I found him in a storm. Brought him to shelter. Shared what food we had. He recovered. Left this behind when he went home." One of the other riders, an older man with a graying beard, made a sound low in his throat. "Recognition." Mercer shot him a glance that could have cut glass. The rider looked away, but his face had gone ashen. Whatever Tocho's name meant to these men, it carried weight that transcended their usual calculations. Silas filed that information away, though he didn't fully understand its value. Mercer turned back to face Silas directly for the first time since spotting the hide. His eyes held a conflict Silas hadn't expected to see. The cold efficiency was still there, but something else fought against it now. Respect. Or maybe superstition. The line between the two blurred in country where old beliefs ran deeper than new laws. "You know what this means?" Mercer asked. "Among the tribes?" Silas shook his head. Honesty seemed safer than pretense. "I know it meant something to the man who gave it to me. I know he told me it would keep my family safe. That's all I needed to know." The words came out simpler than he'd intended, but they held truth. He hadn't questioned Tocho's gift then. He wouldn't dishonor it by pretending understanding now. Mercer's hand moved to his belt. Silas's breath caught, but the man only adjusted his stance, shifting his weight like a man reconsidering a path already chosen. "The white buffalo," Mercer said slowly, each word deliberate, "isn't just rare. It's sacred. Some say it's a sign from the spirits. Others say it's a test, but everyone agrees on one thing." He paused, his eyes moving between Silas and the hide. "You don't touch what's protected by one." The silence that followed pressed down like a physical weight. The other riders watched their leader, waiting for direction their training couldn't provide. This wasn't a situation they'd encountered before. Silas could see the calculation happening behind Mercer's eyes. Profit versus belief. Greed versus the kind of fear that lived in the bones. Then Mercer did something that shocked everyone present. He lowered his head, just slightly. A gesture so small it could have been missed, but unmistakable in its meaning. Not submission, acknowledgement. When he raised his eyes again, they'd hardened with a different kind of resolve. "We're leaving," he said to his men. But Voss wasn't satisfied with silence. "Boss, this is—" The rest of his protest died when he saw what was happening behind them. 3 riders emerged from the ridge to the north, not rushing, not hiding, just appearing like they'd been watching the entire time. Silas's stomach dropped when he recognized the lead horse's distinctive paint markings. Tocho's grandson, Neshoba, rode with 2 other men from the northern settlements. They'd been there all along, witnessing everything. Mercer's hand didn't move toward his weapon, but every muscle in his body coiled with new tension. His crew shifted in their saddles, caught between multiple bad options. Running meant disrespect. Fighting meant worse. Standing still meant accepting judgment from men whose opinions on the white buffalo hide clearly mattered more than any sheriff's badge. The balance had shifted completely. What started as a simple raid had become something far more complicated. Neshoba guided his horse forward at an unhurried pace. He was younger than Silas remembered, perhaps 30, but carried himself with the same quiet authority Tocho had possessed. His eyes took in the scene with perfect understanding. 5 armed men, 1 isolated ranch, a white buffalo hide hanging exactly where it had been placed years ago. No words needed to be spoken about what had almost happened here. Silas felt Nessa's hand grip his arm. She understood the new stakes as clearly as he did. These weren't tribal warriors coming to defend them. They were observers. Witnesses to whether Tocho's gift would hold the power it was meant to carry. Whether the men who claimed to respect the old ways actually did when it cost them something real. This was a test, and everyone present knew it. Neshoba stopped his horse near where Mercer stood. The 2 men regarded each other with the wariness of predators sharing territory. Neither spoke immediately. The silence stretched, filled only with the sound of horses shifting weight and leather creaking. Finally, Neshoba's gaze moved to the white hide. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture eased. Approval, perhaps, or confirmation. "My grandfather speaks of you sometimes," Neshoba said to Silas, his voice carrying across the yard. "The man who shared fire and food when the storm made both precious. The man who asked for nothing in return." He let that sit for a moment before continuing. He chose his gift carefully, knew it would matter someday. Mercer's jaw worked like he was chewing words he couldn't quite spit out. His pride clearly battled with the reality surrounding him. He'd built a reputation on taking what he wanted. Now, in front of witnesses who would carry this story to every settlement and tribe within 200 miles, he had to choose. Take the ranch and lose something more valuable than property, or leave and lose only profit. Voss leaned close to his boss, voice low but not low enough. "We can handle 3 more. The words hung in the air like a blade. Neshoba didn't react, but one of his companions smiled. Not a friendly expression, a knowing one. They'd heard that calculation before, probably from men who no longer made calculations at all. "No," Mercer said, the word final. He turned to his crew. "Mount up. We're done here." The gray-bearded rider complied immediately, relief visible in the sag of his shoulders. The others followed with varying degrees of reluctance. Voss was the last to move, his face tight with frustration, but he obeyed. Chain of command held even when Prophet didn't. Mercer swung back into his saddle with practiced ease, but before turning his horse, he looked once more at the white hide, then at Silas. "You're lucky," he said. Not a threat, a statement of fact. "Luckier than you know." He nudged his horse into motion, and the others fell in behind him. They rode north, giving Neshoba's group a wide berth, their postures stiff with the tension of men who'd been denied something they'd considered already theirs. Silas watched them go, his legs suddenly unsteady. The adrenaline that had kept him upright began to drain, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Nessa's hand remained on his arm, gripping tighter now that the immediate danger had passed. He covered her hand with his own, feeling the tremor in both. Neshoba dismounted and approached the fence. He reached out, fingers hovering near the white hide but not quite touching. "It holds," he said quietly. "Tocho will be pleased." He turned to face Silas fully. "But you should know this protection has limits." The words chilled Silas more than the raiders had. "What kind of limits?" Neshoba's expression grew serious. "Men like Mercer respect the symbols because they fear what comes after breaking them. But desperation makes men foolish. If they have nothing left to lose, symbols lose their power." He glanced toward where the riders had disappeared. "And hungry men become desperate men." Before Silas could process that warning, Neshoba added something that made his blood run cold. "They'll talk about what they saw here today. Word will spread. And when it does, others will come." "Others?" Nessa's voice cracked slightly. "To test the story," Neshoba said simply. "To see if the protection is real, or if it's just fear." Neshoba stayed until the dust from Mercer's retreat had completely settled. His companions remained mounted, scanning the horizon with the practiced vigilance of men who understood that danger rarely announced itself twice. Silas felt the weight of their presence, protective yet uncomfortable. He'd lived independently for so long that help felt like debt, even when freely given. "How did you know?" Silas finally asked. The question that had been building since the moment Neshoba appeared. That they were coming here? Neshoba's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Not quite amusement. Recognition of a pattern. We didn't know they were coming here specifically. We've been tracking Mercer's group for 3 days. They hit the Carlson place 2 nights ago. Took everything worth carrying. Nessa's sharp intake of breath made Silas turn. She knew the Carlsons. Had traded eggs with Mrs. Carlson just last month. Good people. Hard-working. The kind who minded their business and helped neighbors when asked. Are they... She couldn't finish the question. Neshoba's silence answered it. The Carlsons hadn't been protected by anything sacred. Just flesh and hope, neither of which stopped determined men with weapons. Mercer's crew moves in a pattern, Neshoba continued, his tone taking on the quality of a warning meant to be heeded. They scout. They choose targets. They strike. Usually isolated properties. Usually people who can't defend themselves or call for help. He paused, letting that sink in. Your ranch fit that profile perfectly, except for one detail they couldn't have known about from a distance. The white buffalo hide. Silas understood now why Neshoba had called it a test. Mercer's crew worked on information, studied their targets, but symbols carried power they couldn't calculate in advance. The hide had been the variable that broke their pattern, the unknown factor that forced a choice between profit and preservation. So they'll avoid this place now? Silas asked, though he already suspected the answer wouldn't be simple. Mercer will, Neshoba confirmed. His reputation depends on judgment. He chose to respect the symbol in front of witnesses. That choice will follow him. One of Neshoba's companions said something in their language, quick and low. Neshoba nodded before translating. But not everyone operates like Mercer. Some men don't know the stories. Others know them and don't care. Desperation erases caution. Silas felt the familiar weight of vulnerability return. For a brief moment, watching Mercer retreat, he'd felt protected, secure. Now reality reasserted itself with crushing clarity. The hide protected against men who believed in its power. Against men who didn't. It was just decorated leather on a fence. Then what do I do? The question came out more desperate than he'd intended. Neshoba looked at him with something approaching sympathy. You have options. Come to the northern settlements. We have space. Your daughter would be safer. It was a genuine offer, delivered without pressure. But Silas felt his jaw tighten. Leave. Again someone was telling him to leave. His wife's grave rested 50 yards from where they stood. Her memory lived in every weathered board of the house they'd built together. Leaving felt like erasure. I can't, Silas said quietly. Nessa's hand found his arm again, but this time the grip carried frustration rather than fear. She'd been telling him the same thing Neshoba now suggested. Smart, practical, sensible, and utterly impossible for him to accept. Neshoba didn't argue. He simply nodded, as if he'd expected that answer. Then you need to understand what the hide can and cannot do. It buys you respect from those who know its meaning. That respect creates hesitation. Hesitation gives you time. Time for what? Nessa asked, her voice sharp with the edge of someone who'd heard enough careful words around hard truths. Neshoba met her eyes directly. Time to run if you need to. Time to hide. Time to fight if you're capable. He shifted his weight, and leather creaked. The hide is not armor. It's a reputation, and reputations only work on people who've heard them. Silas processed this, feeling the false security of the morning crumble further. He'd been thinking of the hide as protection, a shield Tocho had given him. But Neshoba was right. It was a symbol, powerful only in the minds of those who chose to grant it power. Against ignorance or desperation, it meant nothing. How long before word spreads? He asked. About what happened here today. Neshoba glanced at his companions before answering. It's already spreading. Stories travel faster than horses in this territory. By tomorrow, every settlement within 2 days' ride will know Mercer backed down from a ranch protected by the white buffalo. Some will respect that. Others will see it as a challenge. The words hung in the air like smoke. A challenge? Silas felt cold despite the afternoon heat. Some men need to prove they're braver than their reputation suggests, Neshoba explained. They'll hear that Mercer, the man who's terrorized a dozen ranches, turned away from yours. They'll want to be the ones who didn't. He let that thought settle before adding the final piece. They'll come to prove the symbol has no real power. And when they do, they won't be alone. In the distance, Silas saw movement. More riders on the southern ridge. 4 riders approached from the south, moving faster than Mercer's group had. No careful assessment. No strategic spacing. Just hard riding toward the ranch with purpose that looked nothing like caution. Neshoba's hand moved to the rifle strapped to his saddle, though he didn't draw it. His companions positioned their horses to form a loose barrier between the approaching riders and Silas's property. The shift happened without discussion, pure instinct born from experience. Silas recognized the lead rider before he got close enough to see clearly. Curtis Bowen. The recognition brought no relief. Bowen ran a struggling outfit 30 miles west, known more for drinking than ranching. His 3 companions looked like men who worked for liquor money rather than wages. Rough. Desperate. Exactly the kind Neshoba had warned about. The kind who had nothing to lose and everything to prove. Bowen reined his horse hard enough to make it dance sideways, showing off control he probably didn't possess fully. His eyes were red-rimmed and wild. The look of a man who'd been drinking since morning. Heard an interesting story in town. He called out, voice too loud for the distance. Heard Cade Mercer tuck tail and ran from an old man and a piece of leather. He laughed, but it sounded forced. Performed. Neshoba remained still, a quiet presence that somehow commanded more attention than Bowen's theatrical entrance. When he spoke, his voice carried without being raised. You heard correctly. Mercer showed respect. Wise men do that. The implication hung clear in the air. Bowen caught it and his face darkened. He'd been called unwise by omission, and everyone present knew it. Respect for what? Bowen gestured toward the white buffalo hide with exaggerated dismissal. A dead animal on a fence? That's supposed to scare me? His companions laughed on cue, but the sound had an edge of nervousness. They'd heard the stories too. Probably didn't believe them, or at least pretended not to in front of their employer. But doubt lived in their postures, the way their eyes kept returning to the hide despite their bravado. Silas stepped forward, though Neshoba's slight headshake suggested he shouldn't. This isn't your business, Bowen. Move along. His voice came out steadier than he felt. Bowen's grin widened, showing teeth stained brown from tobacco. See, that's where you're wrong, old man. Mercer making you famous is my business. Because now everyone's going to wonder if Curtis Bowen is too scared to take what Mercer was too soft to touch. The logic was twisted but clear. Bowen needed to prove himself braver than a notorious raider. His failing ranch, his reputation as a drunk, his crew of questionable men, all of it would be redeemed if he could do what Mercer hadn't. Take from the ranch protected by the sacred symbol, strip away the mystique with simple theft. You don't want to do this, Neshoba said. And for the first time Silas heard an edge in the younger man's voice. Not threat. Warning. Bowen's attention shifted fully to Neshoba. And you're going to stop me? You and your 2 friends against 4 of us? He made a show of counting. The math doesn't favor you. One of Bowen's men, a scarred individual with a nervous twitch, leaned close and whispered something urgent. Bowen shoved him back irritably. I don't care about spirits or stories. I care about horses, tools, food stores. Things I can sell. Then you're a fool, Neshoba stated simply. The symbol matters because people believe it matters. You take from this ranch, you're not just stealing from him. He nodded toward Silas. You're challenging every tribe from here to the northern territories, every settlement that trades with us, every person who respects the old agreements. He paused, letting that sink in. How long do you think your ranch survives when you can't trade for supplies? When no one will sell you seed or buy your cattle? The calculation finally showed in Bowen's eyes. He wasn't just facing 3 men. He was facing economic isolation, social exile, the kind of consequences that couldn't be solved with violence or bravado. His ranch was already failing. Cut off from trade networks, it would collapse completely. You're bluffing, Bowen said, but the conviction had drained from his voice. Neshoba didn't respond, which was somehow more powerful than any argument. The silence stretched until one of Bowen's men shifted uncomfortably. Boss, maybe we should. Bowen cut him off with a savage gesture. His pride warred visibly with his survival instinct. Then he made a choice that surprised everyone. He dismounted, walked toward the fence, toward the white buffalo hide, each step deliberate, aggressive. Neshoba tensed, but didn't move to intercept. Silas felt his heart hammering. Nessa gripped his arm hard enough to hurt. Bowen stopped directly in front of the hide, close enough to touch it. His hand rose slowly, fingers reaching. The moment crystallized. Everyone held their breath. Then Bowen's hand stopped, hovering inches from the white surface. His face contorted with conflict, touch it and prove bravery, or retreat and preserve what little he had left. Before he could decide, a voice called out from the ridge behind them. "I wouldn't." Everyone turned. 3 more riders sat silhouetted against the sky, but these weren't tribal observers or drunk ranchers. These men wore badges. The lead rider descended the ridge with the steady confidence of someone accustomed to authority being respected. Marshal Hewitt. Silas recognized him from town visits, a man in his 50s who'd held his position for nearly 2 decades. The badge on his chest caught the sunlight as he approached, flanked by 2 deputies whose hands rested casually near their holstered weapons. Not threatening, just present. Bowen's hand dropped from its reach toward the hide, though his face twisted with frustration at the interrupted moment. He'd been seconds from either proving himself brave or revealing himself a coward, and the marshal's arrival had stolen that choice from him. "Marshal," Bowen said, trying for casual and landing somewhere near defensive. "Just passing through, checking on old Drummond here." Hewitt's expression suggested he'd heard better lies from worse liars. His horse moved at a walk, unhurried, until he positioned himself where he could see all parties clearly. His eyes took in the scene with practiced assessment. The tribal observers, the drunk rancher and his nervous crew, the old man and his daughter standing near a house that showed clear signs of struggle, and the white buffalo hide hanging prominently on the fence. "Interesting gathering," Hewitt observed, his tone neutral but his meaning clear. Nothing about this looked like a social visit. "Mr. Drummond, you having any trouble today?" The question was directed at Silas, but delivered loud enough for everyone to hear, a public record being established. Silas felt the weight of multiple stares. Bowen's carried warning, Neshoba's carried patience, Nessa's carried hope that maybe finally someone with actual authority would help. "Had some visitors," Silas said carefully. "Some more welcome than others." Hewitt nodded as if this confirmed something he'd already suspected. "We heard reports of Mercer's crew in the area. Carlson Place got hit hard. When we tracked their path, it led here." His eyes moved to Neshoba, though it seems they didn't stay long. Neshoba met the marshal's gaze evenly. They showed respect and left peacefully. No laws broken. The statement held layers. Mercer had committed no crime here, regardless of his actions elsewhere. The white buffalo hide had accomplished what law enforcement couldn't always guarantee: protection without violence. Hewitt seemed to understand this distinction. His jaw worked slightly, processing the implications. Bowen shifted his weight, and his horse stamped nervously. The drunk rancher's earlier bravado had evaporated in the presence of actual consequences. Marshal Hewitt turned his attention fully to Bowen now, and the temperature seemed to drop. "Curtis, didn't expect to find you this far from your property. Thought you had a ranch to run." The words were polite. The subtext wasn't. "Just riding," Bowen muttered. But his crew had already started edging their horses backward. Subtle, incremental, the kind of retreat that could be denied as merely adjusting position. Hewitt noticed, of course. He noticed everything. "That hide on the fence," the marshal said, addressing everyone and no one, "means something to a lot of people in this territory. Tribes, settlers, traders. Whole economy depends on good relations." He let that statement breathe before continuing. "Anyone interfering with that symbol, they're not just causing trouble for one old rancher. They're threatening the peace we've all worked to maintain. And I take threats to the peace personally." His hand rested on his saddle horn, inches from his weapon, a reminder without a direct threat. Bowen's face flushed red, whether from alcohol or anger or shame. Silas couldn't tell. "I wasn't going to touch anything," Bowen protested, though his hand had been reaching for the hide when interrupted. Hewitt smiled without humor. "Then you've got nothing to worry about. But I think you and your boys should head back to your own property now. Make sure everything's secure there. Lot of raiders in the area, as you know. Wouldn't want your place getting hit while you're out riding." The dismissal was clear. Bowen's men didn't wait for their boss to agree. They turned their horses and started moving before he could form a response. Bowen sat alone for 3 heartbeats longer, his pride making one last stand against reality. Then, he wheeled his horse around with more force than necessary and kicked it into a trot, chasing after his departing crew. The dust from their retreat hung in the air like punctuation. Hewitt watched them go with the patience of a man who'd seen this play out countless times. When he turned back to Silas, his expression had softened slightly. "You're making yourself a target, Drummond. That hide is protection, but it's also a beacon, Every man who wants to prove he's tougher than the last one will see you as the test. Silas nodded slowly, the truth of it settling in his bones. I know, he said quietly, but leaving means abandoning her. He didn't need to specify who. Everyone knew he meant his wife's grave. Hewitt's expression showed understanding, the kind that came from personal loss. I can't station men here, the marshal said. Don't have the resources, but I can spread word that this property is under official watch. Might slow down the opportunists. What about the determined ones? Nessa asked, her voice sharp with the question Silas couldn't bring himself to speak. Hewitt met her eyes honestly. Those are the ones you run from, Miss Drummond. When determination meets desperation, badges don't always matter. The truth of his words hung heavy between them. Then Neshoba spoke up, his voice carrying a new weight. She won't have to run alone. Silas turned to Neshoba, uncertain what the younger man meant. The offer hung in the air, undefined, but weighted with significance. Marshal Hewitt remained still, listening but not interfering. His presence had shifted from law enforcement to witness, understanding that what came next fell outside his jurisdiction. This was about agreements older than territorial law. Neshoba dismounted in one fluid motion and approached the fence where the white buffalo hide hung. He didn't touch it, but stood close enough that his respect was obvious. My grandfather gave you this hide for a reason. Not just gratitude, not just payment for kindness. He turned to face Silas directly. He saw something in you. A man who helped without asking what he'd receive in return. That quality is rare. Silas felt uncomfortable with the praise. He'd simply done what anyone should do, finding a man half frozen in a storm and offering shelter. Nothing heroic. Nothing deserving of sacred gifts or protection that drew danger as much as it repelled it. I just shared what I had, he said quietly. Neshoba nodded as if this proved his point rather than diminished it. Exactly. And now we offer to share what we have. He gestured to his companions, who'd dismounted as well. Protection isn't just symbols. It's people. Community. My grandfather's gift was meant to mark you as someone under our watch. We've honored that by keeping distance, respecting your independence. But the distance can close when needed. Nessa stepped forward, hope lighting her face for the first time since Mercer's crew had appeared. You're saying you'll protect the ranch? Neshoba's expression showed gentle correction. I'm saying you'd be welcome in our settlement. Your father's debt has been paid, but the connection remains. We protect our own. The word own carried implications that made Silas pause. Acceptance meant more than just physical safety. It meant joining a community, adopting their ways, becoming part of something larger than his isolated existence. His wife would have embraced it without hesitation. She'd understood the value of belonging. But Silas had always been a man apart, comfortable in solitude, resistant to obligations beyond his immediate family. Marshal Hewitt cleared his throat. That's a generous offer, Neshoba. Your people and mine have worked hard to maintain peace. Having the Drummonds under your protection would strengthen that bond. The political angle was clear. Silas's acceptance would be seen as a gesture of trust between settlers and tribal communities. His refusal might damage relations that benefited everyone. What about the ranch? Silas asked, though he already knew the answer. What happens to this land? Neshoba didn't sugarcoat it. It stands empty. Or you sell it. The hide would come with you, of course. Its protection extends to you personally, not to the property. So the choice crystallized. Keep the land and remain a target for every man who wanted to prove himself braver than Mercer. Or abandon everything his wife had helped build and start over among people whose ways he didn't fully understand. Before Silas could respond, one of the marshal's deputies called out, "Sir, riders approaching from the east." Everyone turned to see dust rising in the distance. Multiple horses moving fast. Too many to count from this range, but enough to make Hewitt's hand drop to his weapon. Neshoba's companions moved to their horses with practiced efficiency, retrieving rifles with the smooth coordination of men who'd done this before. "Seems word travels faster than we thought," Hewitt said grimly. He counted silently, lips moving. "I make it 7, maybe 8 riders. Too many for my 2 deputies and me to handle if they're committed." He looked at Neshoba. "Your people fight. We've got a real problem. Becomes a tribal conflict instead of law enforcement." Neshoba understood the implication. If his people engaged in violence to protect Silas, it could ignite tensions that would affect hundreds of families across the territory. Treaties were fragile things, easily broken by bloodshed. even justified bloodshed. So we watch, Neshoba said, frustration clear in his voice. While they test the symbol, the approaching riders resolved into individuals as they got closer. Silas's stomach dropped when he recognized the leader. Not Mercer, not Bowen, someone worse. Gideon Ross, a man whose reputation made both of them look cautious. Ross didn't raid for profit. He raided because chaos fed something broken inside him. And he'd brought a small army to prove that no symbol, no matter how sacred, could stop him. Marshal Hewitt drew his weapon slowly. Everyone behind me. Now. His voice carried the authority of someone who'd made peace with dying if necessary. But Silas knew the math. 3 lawmen and 3 tribal observers against 8 raiders led by a man who'd burned homesteads for the sport of watching families flee. The white buffalo hide had protected him from greed and superstition. But could it protect him from madness? Ross reined his horse to a stop just outside weapon range. His smile was the worst thing Silas had ever seen. Heard this place was untouchable, Ross called out, his voice carrying mocking amusement. Thought I'd test that claim. Ross's eyes swept across the defenders with the assessment of a predator counting prey. His 8 men spread out behind him, weapons visible, faces hard with the anticipation of violence. But then his gaze landed on the white buffalo hide. For 3 heartbeats, nothing changed in his expression. Then something flickered. Not fear. Recognition of a variable he hadn't anticipated. That's what all the fuss is about? Ross gestured toward the hide with deliberate mockery. A piece of leather? But his voice carried a question underneath the bravado. He was testing his own men as much as the defenders. Silas watched Ross's crew, saw the way 2 of them exchanged glances. Uncertainty creeping in. These weren't fanatics. They were hired guns who worked for profit, not ideology. And profit required living long enough to spend it. Marshal Hewitt's voice cut through the tension. Ross, you're outnumbered in ways that matter more than guns. He nodded toward the horizon where more dust rose. I sent my deputy for reinforcements when I heard you were headed this direction. Figure you've got maybe 10 minutes before 20 armed settlers arrive. Men with families. Men with stakes in keeping the peace. Ross's confident smile faltered. His eyes tracked to the approaching dust, then back to the marshal. 20 settlers won't stop me from taking what I want. But his voice had lost its mocking edge. Doubt had entered the equation. Neshoba stepped forward, his posture radiating the quiet authority his grandfather had possessed. You're right. 20 settlers alone wouldn't stop you. But 20 settlers plus 3 tribal witnesses, plus a United States Marshal, all testifying that you violated the most sacred symbol in the territory. He let that sink in. Every tribe from here to the northern ranges would have your name. Every trading post would close its doors. Every settlement would bar you entry. One of Ross's men, a younger rider with a nervous twitch, leaned toward his boss. Gideon, maybe we should. Ross backhanded him without looking, the crack of knuckles against jaw loud in the stillness. But the damage was done. The doubt had spoken aloud. The other men shifted in their saddles, reconsidering their odds. This wasn't just about winning a fight. It was about surviving the aftermath. Look at that hide, Neshoba continued, his voice taking on the quality of someone explaining basic mathematics. It represents something bigger than any of us. My grandfather gave it to a man who showed kindness when profit suggested cruelty. It hangs there as a reminder that honor still exists. You tear it down. You're not just attacking one ranch. You're attacking the idea that goodness can be protected. The words landed differently than any threat could have. Ross's face contorted with frustration, but his hand didn't move toward his weapon. Because Neshoba was right, and everyone present knew it. The approaching settlers materialized into individuals. Silas recognized faces. The Hendersons from 5 miles south, the Yates family, old Mortimer, who ran the supply depot. People who'd heard about trouble and come despite having no obligation to do so. They formed a loose line behind the marshal, not soldiers, but citizens drawn together by something larger than individual survival. One of Ross's men, the oldest of the crew with gray streaking his beard, lowered his rifle slowly. I ain't dying for this, Gideon. That hide means we'd be hunted by every tribe and every settler in the territory. For what? Some tools and livestock? The defection rippled through Ross's remaining men. Another lowered his weapon. Then another. Ross sat alone in his conviction, surrounded by men who'd made the calculation that survival trumped loyalty. You're all cowards, Ross spat, but the word landed hollow. His crew had made the smart choice, The choice that let them see tomorrow. Ross stared at the white buffalo hide one last time, and something in his posture broke. Not submission. Acceptance of a reality he couldn't change through violence alone. This isn't over, he said. But everyone knew it was. He wheeled his horse and rode east, not waiting to see if his men followed. They didn't immediately. They sat, defeated but alive, until Marshal Hewitt gestured for them to follow their boss. The settlers didn't cheer. They simply stood witness as Ross's crew departed in scattered disorder. When the last rider disappeared over the ridge, Silas felt his legs nearly buckle. Nessa caught his arm, steadying him. "It's over, Papa." Neshoba approached the fence and placed his palm flat against the post beside the white buffalo hide. "This stays here," he said firmly. "A marker that this land is under shared protection. Settler and tribe together. Anyone who touches it answers to everyone." Marshal Hewitt nodded agreement. "I'll make it official. This property is recognized as protected ground, neutral territory where both communities have interest." He looked at Silas. "You can stay or go. Either way, you'll be safe." Silas looked at his daughter, then at the house he'd built with his wife, then at the grave 50 yards distant. Finally, his eyes settled on the white buffalo hide, pristine and powerful in its simplicity. "I'll stay," he said quietly. "But not alone anymore." Neshoba smiled, the first genuine warmth Silas had seen from the younger man. "You never were alone. You just didn't know it yet." The words settled over Silas like a weight lifting rather than descending. The hide had protected him, not through magic but through the community it represented, through witnesses willing to stand together, through the simple truth that some things mattered more than any individual's greed or violence. The sun moved toward evening, casting long shadows across land that had seen violence threatened but not realized. The white buffalo hide remained on the fence, a symbol not of fear, but of what happened when people chose honor over chaos. And in that choice, Silas finally understood what Tocho had given him all those years ago. Not just protection, belonging. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier, where courage and honor face their greatest tests. Don't forget to subscribe and consider leaving a super chat to help us keep bringing you stories like these. Your support means everything to us.